And we were just really interested in this idea that here's a complex piece of maths. Can graphic design do something to make that more accessible rather? And interestingly, some of the people who bought this book have been schools. So schools have ended up using this as a way of opening up what maths and what the golden section can be. I should explain this one. So this was Ryan Todd, an illustrator, who looked at what would happen if you took the proportion of the golden mean and applied it to everyday objects. So it skews everyday objects, and it kind of questions this idea of beauty. And then MGMT, a New York-based design studio, used the Fibonacci series of numbers, which is part of the golden section, to generate code which related to a text. And they set up a kind of, again, an interactive kind of Twitter feed in relation to this particular response. And then finally, I love this. This is the golden ass, the backside, by Polish design group Homework, who took the idea of the golden spiral and looked at, I guess, just having fun with it. So this was a book that we learnt a lot from doing. In fact, there is one more, because there's Malika Favre, who's a wonderful illustrator and animator, who, again, used the golden section to generate kind of pattern, but the figure and the figure's orientation on the page, the angles of those patterns, everything is in relation to the golden section. So for many designers and illustrators, they enjoyed this brief because it was a set of rules which they could use to generate their visuals. And that idea of restriction and working to a brief, a set of kind of restrictions to help generate something which is then expressive, really appealed. Now, I know when I explain this book, I always struggle a bit, the maths book, because without going into the maths, it's quite hard to see how this book functions. And we learned quite a lot from this. And I think that's the other thing I wanted to say. We learned that collaboration is really important and that we needed to have experts from other fields work with us. But we also learned to be really critical of what we produced. And this sold pretty well, but it had problems with it, we think. And I think still we look at it and wonder whether we could have explained more clearly what we were trying to do. In each of our books, we ask the artists and designers to explain their rationale, because the other thing we really would love our readership to know is what the intention of the designer is. It's part of demystifying kind of what graphic design is. But our third book, we became really nosy about ourselves. So we wanted to make books about what graphic design does and how it functions in relation to other subjects. But we couldn't avoid the fact that we were also really interested in graphic designers, basically because we're nosy. And through being myself in design education and Lucy a practicing designer for many years, we kind of knew that there was a lack of information, a lack of data out there about contemporary designers. So we created a book which is graphic design and sociology, or social science, I should say. And this book is a survey. It's called Graphic Designers Surveyed. And we worked with a social scientist to design a survey that we then sent out and circulated via email, via Twitter, via various kind of call-outs in journals and magazines, to ask graphic designers to tell us who they are. And we asked some questions which were very much about the work of graphic design, but we were also nosy. We also wanted to know if they were happy. We wanted to know about their relationship to clients. We wanted to know what the best thing about being a designer is and what the worst thing is. And we ended up getting just over 2,500 respondents to the survey, which again completely astounded us, and that was across the UK and the US. So we were looking for graphic designers based in 2 countries because we knew that they would be, they'd generate comparative data. So 68% of our designers were based in the UK, 32% were in the US. But the citizenship of the designers was really interesting, and I'm sure we have a pretty mixed audience here today, and I feel that this is a political statement now to say how important it is to have genuine kind of cultural diversity in the profession of design or anything to do with communication, because we are communicating in this very diverse world. And it was really fascinating to see just how many nationalities there were who took part in this book, who are UK based, but originate or have citizenship in these countries. And then the design problem for this book was, how do we take all this data and make it a book that is readable? And no presentation of data is neutral. You can't be neutral. Every time you choose or select data and you present it, you are leading your audience in a particular way. So we had to be very careful about this, and we ended up as a design studio designing most of the book, but then we invited Stephanie Posevich to be the other designer of some key points. Now, she's the author behind Dear Data. Some of you will know that book, and she has subsequently produced that book. And she's fascinating, and she worked with us to help develop a series of symbols which would allow you to identify yourself as a respondent. So these very abstract-looking symbols here, if you use the key, allows you to work out what gender, nationality, age group, profession or student, and lots of other information. So you could, if you answered our survey, you could actually locate yourself within the pages, the opening pages of the book in these symbols. There were a few things that emerged that we knew would, but really still brought us up short. One was just how unethnically diverse a certain strata of our profession is still. So still, most of our respondents were white, and when you look particularly at the US data in relation to the general population, that really kind of brought us up short. It was interesting to us how many of the designers that we were respondents to the survey had studied design, graphic design, but also the names of the courses. So you have people who'd studied visual communication or other parts of design, and it became kind of fascinating to us because so many younger people took part in this survey. I think, well, we know because we advertised it through Twitter and on social media to a large extent. But it was really interesting starting to look at what people study and what that leads you onto in your career. What was interesting is that 88% of the people who answered this survey had an undergraduate degree or higher. And that's a really high number. So it made us think that one could say that we are a really well-educated industry based on our survey. And we kind of had these little caveats in the corner of each book. This is Julianne wonders, are graphic designers getting better educated? You know, we can't say that they definitely are, but it was a question that we posed to our readers. This was close to my heart. In our education section, we asked those people who said they taught design what their motivation was. And most of those respondents, so 45%, nearly half, said that they wanted to teach and that they wanted to share knowledge. And then we were interested that also important was influencing the shape of the discipline. So you're the future. You know, we teach because we want to influence. Gender was the other thing that came through. So interestingly, male graphic designers are paid substantially more than female graphic designers, both in the UK and the US. We don't have an answer as to why that is. The book wasn't trying to answer it, we were just trying to present the data. But this is quite revealing. In our survey, the male respondents were more likely to think that hard work most advantaged them. So they'd got to where they were based on hard work, whereas women felt like who you knew mattered the most. So the perception of the industry was really quite different. And confidence, I mentioned confidence earlier. We were really interested in the confidence that designers have and how confident you feel about presenting your work. And men felt much more confident than women about talking about their work. This will, I'm sure, not be a surprise to many of you. We asked whether designers work more hours than they were paid. Yes, by some margin. So the size of the type represents the percentage of difference. And then the other thing was how many of the graphic designers had partners who earned more money than them, that graphic design was a relatively poorly paid industry, and that most graphic designers had a partner who was a non-designer and therefore supplemented their income. So we started to get into this really interesting kind of sociological information, which told us something about who designers are, or just about the 2,500 designers that we interviewed. And I wouldn't want you to be kind of pessimistic about it, because interestingly, most of the younger graphic designers were earning kind of proportionately higher than their older equivalents had at the same age. So you're in the right industry if you're looking to earn. This was an interesting one, whether designers kept work in hope that there might be a future retrospective. And then this was I think this is probably one of the last slides on this project. This was really interesting because we wanted to know about how one felt about the work that we make. You know, what is it that makes you feel creatively fulfilled? And this response, that 61% of respondents needed more than half of their projects to be creatively fulfilling to feel content. 9% of respondents needed less than a quarter of projects to be creatively fulfilling to feel content. So really, we look for creatively fulfilling projects. It might seem common sense, but it was a really interesting thing to kind of reveal through data. And I would say that graphic design, and for Lucy and I, is the bit of our work that's really creatively fulfilling. So we asked questions about criticism, we asked questions about saying yes or no to jobs, we asked about free pitching, the fact that you don't get paid to pitch. We asked about the skills that current designers wish that they had or that they would think was most important for them to learn. I'm sure it's not a surprise to you in this audience that coding was top, that they felt that they would have much greater power in the jobs that they were doing if they could code as well as design. And then, have you ever been asked to make it bigger? We have this joke in graphic design that clients will say, I really like it, but can you just make it bigger? As if there's a button on the Mac which is make it bigger. And as you'll all know, if you're designing something, you change one element, everything else has to change. And look how many designers have actually been asked to make it bigger. That's a big proportion. And then finally, the cover of the book was in relation to the favourite Pantone colour. So it was a really kind of designer, nerdy question, but we asked designers what their favourite Pantone colour was, and it's the orange 021, which is the colour of the front of the book. The lesson from this book was it's okay to be a little bit mad. So this is a book about nuns, and this is a graphic design and religion book. Lucy went to a Catholic school. I was not brought up a Catholic. I didn't know the Catholic religion. However, we both had this fascination with nuns, and we used to see nuns, and we used to talk to each other, tweet each other to say, I've just seen a nun. It was a kind of, I don't know, it was a slightly mad thing. But when we came to think about a graphic design and religion title, this was a title that we knew nobody else would publish. Nobody else would touch a book on this. So we thought, this is our publishing company, we should do this. And we commissioned this illustrator, a graphic artist, he calls himself, Ryan Todd, and a theology expert, Veronica Bennett. And we worked as the kind of third collaborative element in this trio to design this book, which is a guide, a visual guide to the nun's habit. And the reason we were interested in the nun's habit is that it's a graphic code, a bit like a jockey wears a strip, and you would look in the racing pages of a newspaper and you'd see the little graphic of the colour codes that they're wearing. Well, nuns have a kit of parts, and this kit of parts of clothing, I can get onto it, is not just a kit of parts in terms of the colour and the design, but also in the order in which clothes are worn. And there are prayers that nuns say at each layer of clothing that they put on. And we became really kind of enchanted by this. And we realised that, and again, this won't surprise you probably, but there's no existing kind of family tree of nuns that exists out there, that there is no book you can go to look up a nun's habit. So this ended up being a piece of original research. And our theologian was contacting convents and monasteries and kind of papal institutions to find out about these nuns and to find out about different orders and congregations of nuns, what they wear, why they wear it, and how they wear it. And this book, this was the order of how the clothing goes on, and the various elements, so the rosary that accompany the habit. But this book has become a kind of a compendium of information that doesn't exist anywhere else. And it includes nuns who are not seen out in the public. They're cloistered. They only are seen by other people in their convent. So you couldn't use photography to record this. You couldn't use film. You can't make a documentary. You know, this is where illustration and graphic design really play a role. This beautiful typeface, by the way, is called Marion, and it's designed by Paul Barnes. So we looked at every detail in the book, having a link back to the idea of kind of religion or faith. And then this order, so the first time you see this nun, you see her from behind, and that's because she exists in a convent and she's not seen out in the real world, out in the world. So she's an unseen nun. Then you turn the page to the front, and then if a nun is seen and is a nun that exists out in the community, you see her face on first. So this book includes some really wonderful, that hat, that wimple is absolutely amazing. Some of you may know of the typographer Phil Baines. We interviewed him for our introduction because Phil trained to be a priest before he became a typographer. And his Aunt Fanny was one of these nuns and wore a wimple like that. So we had great conversations with him, having a look at old photographs of this particular habit. But the reason that this has been such a good learning project is that it's something that was very personal for us to produce, but it was so kind of niche that we thought that we just might find an audience. And I remember when I was at college, my tutor saying to me one day, the thing about audience is that when you try and reach a mass audience, you often fail because you're thinking of quantity. If you're really thinking about communication, think about the one person that you want to say this to. And if you can achieve that kind of intimate communication of one-to-one, then you sometimes hit the universal where it's meaningful to everybody, because we all relate to a kind of intimate type of communication. And that's what we tried to do with this book. We made it for us. We made it for the nuns that we were recording. And interestingly, we've had really great coverage. So Woman's Hour on Radio 4, we've been in The Guardian, Sunday Times, The Observer, Frank Skinner's radio show profiled it. You know, it's been really bizarre, and this is just a little book of nuns. But it is rather beautiful, and it is capturing something at the time of its passing, really, which is that the habit is beginning to disappear. Right, I'm going to end on our final project, and this is just to give you a little heads up. We have recently been commissioned to not produce a book, but to curate an exhibition. And that thing about the confidence that sometimes you need in a project to really kind of, generate work and generate momentum, this was such a great thing for us. We approached the Welcome Collection, who are up in Euston, who are this wonderful organisation who are committed to communicating health and medicine through art, design, through creativity. And we approached them thinking that we would like to do a book on graphic design and health. And as we were talking, what came out of the three meetings that we had was that really this was an exhibition. And so we've been commissioned to design and curate an exhibition on graphic design and health, and we're calling it this: Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? Because in the end, graphic design is often superfluous. It's there to entertain us, it's there to make things look nice, it's there to serve a purpose, which is often about selling. And the one area where you can absolutely say we're doing more than that is in relation to health. And I haven't got any work to show you yet, but I can show you some of the potential exhibits for this show. It opens up at the Welcome in September of this year. But it will include how graphic design has responded to epidemics, from cholera through to the plague, through to Ebola and Zika. And graphic design has played this really fundamental role in being a warning, being part of the information and the prevention in times of epidemic and contagion. Graphic design plays a really vital role in wayfinding, and in hospitals and kind of clinics in particular, the graphic design is part of how one orientates oneself. And in fact, there's been a really fascinating piece of research done by the design group Pearson Lloyd relating to violence in A&E departments, and showing that through graphic design, you can reduce violence in A&E because you can orientate a patient much more quickly and remove the panic and remove the anxiety which fuels the violence. And this is actually an example from Japan. Kenya Hara, who's the designer behind Muji, some of you will know of, has done some really wonderful hospital design, which we're going to include. The Swiss design studio at pharmaceutical company Geigy, if you don't know the design produced for Geigy, it's stunning work. Many of the pioneers of Swiss modernism worked in the design department for Geigy, designing pill packaging and advertising and promotion for Geigy. We're including their work. And then this is one of the areas where, of course, graphic design is complicit in selling cigarettes originally, but now the biggest aspect of the anti-smoking lobby is about the picture warnings and removing branding from cigarette packages. If you think about it, it's the one area where the world has said graphic design is powerful. It's the most powerful tool in people smoking and continuing to smoke. So there's a really kind of fascinating story around that. We're looking at the way in which graphic design and anatomy work together. This is an app called TinyBops, which was paper engineered and then developed into an interactive app. You can buy it. It's a kids app, but it takes you through the anatomy of the human body. It's totally charming and educational. We're looking at the kind of ultimate emblem of graphic design, the Red Cross, and its origins and what it means, and this idea that graphic design communicates across language and across cultures. And we're looking at Isotype. Some of you will know the work of Otto and Marie Neurath from Isotype, kind of in a way, the original information graphics with their Isotype system, and looking at the work they did out in Africa with TB and leprosy, working in Nigeria to design information. And then finally, looking at something closer to home, looking at how graphic designers work to try and communicate really complex information. So Alzheimer's, there's an association in the Netherlands, and Studio Dunbar have designed this interactive identity to try and make the type do what Alzheimer does to your brain. So this project is one of many that's going to be in this exhibition. And I think what it's taught us, the process of designing this exhibition, the process of designing the books, is that graphic design is all about other things. It's not just about itself. And that the more that we can communicate to people who are non-designers as well as designers what it can do, hopefully the more enabled, the more confident we become as designers and clients become in commissioning us. And we're really ambitious, not for us, but for graphic design. We really think graphic design can save your life. So I end this talk by saying, be confident. You are, as designers and visual communicators, you're so powerful. And if you really think about why you make work, who you're making it for and what you want it to do, and you find the place that you, that kind of is meaningful for you in terms of the discipline. And it might not be social work, it might not be work within health, but it's the thing that fulfills you creatively and it has a function, your work, then that's a great thing. But don't underestimate your power. You do shape the world. So thank you very much.